Thank you for your welcome, and it's good to be with you again. Do we still have online then? So welcome and greetings to all of you who are watching online. Do turn then to the book of Esther. We're going to look at the book of Esther today. And when Steve asked me to come, I thought, well, I could use something that I've preached on before, but as I had just begun to read the book of Esther again, I thought, well, there is something here that is really wonderful. And I love the book of Esther, as I'm sure those of you who are familiar with it love the book of Esther as well. It is such a fantastic, true story. And right at the outset, I want to say to especially those of us who are younger, you'll probably hear that when you read the book of Esther, you don't read about God. You don't read the name of God, neither of Satan or of any angel or anything. And it seems to just be a story on the human level. But when you see what's happening here, you must see that God is at work, and if anything can encourage you to see how God works and to encourage you to think about both the truthfulness of God, the existence of God, the power of God. These wonderful stories of the Bible are so great to help you in that and to build your faith in God, and also to just show you how it is that God works. Some of us were listening to a man on Monday evening at Bethany School. It's Monday, wasn't it? Just Monday gone. Seems a long time ago. But he was speaking to the parents and the teachers at Bethany School, telling us the power of stories and how he uses many, many different types of stories just to start people to think, so that on the back of that he's able to tell them the truths of the gospel, and of just to start to make people think about God, about the Lord Jesus, about spiritual matters. But also you have the true stories in the Bible. The Bible is so full of stories. Stories are wonderful. They capture our imagination. They show us what is happening. And, people believe all sorts of different narratives, we say today. But there is the narrative of the Bible and the narrative of the history of God and God's people. That is really what we ought to be proclaiming and holding on to. And so here is then a great story. Now we're going to pick up the reading in chapter 3. So for those of you that are very familiar with the story, bear with me. But those of us who may not be familiar with the book of Esther, this book is written while the people of Israel have been taken into captivity by the Babylonians, but now the Babylonian kingdom has been followed by the Persian kingdom, Persian rulers, and there's a man called King Ahasuerus who is in power. And what happens is that this man basically sends his first wife away from him because she disobeys him, and then goes about looking for a new wife. And through a process of selection, this woman called Esther becomes his wife. Now, Esther is a Jew. Esther is a Jew, and that's really, really important because of what follows on in the rest of the story, while we see the Jewish people in that land came under much trouble. So let's pick up the reading from chapter 3. I'm reading from the New King James, so some of the words might be different. In your Bibles, NIV, do they have King Xerxes instead? So that's the other name for Ahasuerus. So where I say Ahasuerus, it is Xerxes in your translation. Let's read then from verse 1. after these things. Now, these things was that some men had been plotting against the king in the chapter 2, had been found out, but were put to death. But in chapter 3 we read, after these things, King Ahasuerus promoted this man, Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and advanced him and set him his seat above all the princes who were with him. And all the king's servants who were within the king's gate bowed and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai would not bow down or pay homage. Now, Mordecai is, I forget now, either the uncle or the cousin of Esther, but Mordecai is related to Esther. So then the king's servants who were within the king's gate said to Mordecai, why do you transgress the king's command? Now it happened, when they spoke to him daily, that he would not listen to them, that they told it to Haman, to see whether Mordecai's words would stand, for Mordecai had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow or pay him homage, Haman was filled with wrath. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him of the people of Mordecai. Instead, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, the people of Mordecai. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is the lot, before Haman to determine the day and the month, until it fell on the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from all other peoples, and they do not keep the king's laws. Therefore, it is not fitting for the king to let them remain. If it pleases the king, let a decree be written that they may be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who do the work, to bring it to the king's treasuries. So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, the money and the people are given to you to do with them as seems good to you. Then the king's scribes were called on the 13th day of the first month, and a decree was written according to all that Haman commanded, to the king's satraps, to the governors who are over each province, to the officials of all people, to every province according to its script, and to every people in their language. In the name of King Ahasuerus it was written and sealed with the king's signet ring. And the letters were sent by couriers into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate the Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. A copy of the document was to be issued as law in every province, being published for all people, that they should be ready for that day. The couriers went out, hastened by the king's command, and the decree was proclaimed in Shushan the citadel. So the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was perplexed. So firstly, I'd just like us to look at the characters, some of the main characters that we have here in this chapter, and then to look at what it is that happens in this passage and how it should encourage us, teach us, prepare us as the people of God in this world. Because what happens in this chapter should be placed in the wider context of the whole Bible. Because what is happening here, this enmity against the Jews, we're told of Haman that he was an enemy of the Jews. You see there in verse 10, the enemy of the Jews. What happens here is like a cameo in what has been happening ever since Genesis chapter 3, where Satan has been against God, against God's people, and has been doing all he can to bring them down and to get at God. And that's a story that's repeated over and over again, all the way through, and is a story that is still there today. It is still the same situation in which we're in today, this intense spiritual battle. And although we don't see God, we don't see Satan, and you don't see God's name, you don't see Satan's name in this book, yet they're there behind the scenes, if you like, and so much that is happening actually shows you, proves to you the truthfulness of God's existence and of all that God has already said in His Word, and how it is that we can rely on Him, because there's nothing new, if you like, under the sun. We're in that same battle that the people of God were in right back there at Esther's time. So first of all then, Ahasuerus, or Xerxes. Now, this man ruled a vast empire. We are told of all his provinces and so on. And in chapter 1, he has this great days of celebration to show off, his majesty for many days. 180 days, we're told, in chapter 1. This man ruled an empire unlike any empire until that day in the ancient world. This was an empire that had covered so much of the Middle East and right up to the borders of even Greece itself. And indeed, it was the Greeks then that would bring the Persian kingdom down later on. And in that statue, if you remember it from the book of Daniel, you have the Babylonian kingdom, the Persian kingdom, followed by the Greek kingdom. But there was a lot of enmity between the Greeks and the Persians, because his kingdom had extended right up to Greece as well. And so this man controlled a superpower. He had unprecedented power. Just the sheer weight of his power was just so great in that ancient world. But having all this power, Ahasuerus was not a very wise man. Let's put it that way. I mean, we see that in chapter 1 that he wants his queen Vashti to come in all her royal robes. She was a beautiful woman, so everybody could look at her, admire her. She refused. I mean, that was foolish of him to ask in the first place. He could control vast empires, but he couldn't control, his own pride and vanity. But also, he then takes counsel with his so-called wise men. She's to be put away so that no man can struggle in his own home after seeing what Vashti had done. And then they recommend to him, well, you best go about choosing a new wife and so on. But he also then sets this man, Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advances him. Again, I don't know how it was that he came to prominence, but when you read about Haman, this was not a wise choice. Now, who is Haman? Haman, we're told, is an Agagite. We're told also that he is the enemy of the Jews. As soon as he knows about Mordecai and about Mordecai's people, he sets out to destroy all of them, not just Mordecai. And we think that he's actually a descendant of the Amalekites, so the ancient enemy of the Israelites, the Amalekites, and some people think that he's actually a descendant from them. So he has this ancient enmity to the people of Israel. And as soon as he sees this man Mordecai isn't bowing down to him and paying him homage and so on, he wants to not only destroy him, but his people. Now, it's interesting that this command that was given to pay homage to Haman in verse 2, we're told, for so the king had commanded concerning him. This didn't come from Haman directly. Maybe he requested it, we don't know, but it came from the king. So that you would have thought, well, actually, this needed the king's authority to be put into place. Maybe it was because Haman himself was unpopular. I mean, if he was, you can see why. But this was under the king's command. Again, you can see, you could say, the foolishness of Ahasuerus to do something like that. So we have Ahasuerus, we have Haman, then we have Mordecai. Mordecai the Jew, related to Esther, who is now as a Jew, who is now also the woman who is now married to this Persian king. And Esther has kept her identity secret in that she's not yet told him that she's a Jew. That's important for now. She reveals that later, as we know. But here is a Jew married to the most powerful man in the kingdom. And here is Haman, doesn't know about Esther's heritage. Here is Haman, sets out to destroy the Jews. You couldn't write this and invent this. Hollywood couldn't make a better plot, could they? You know, it's just wonderful how God has everything in control. And you can just see clearly the great providence of God in protecting his people here. Before Haman sets out to murder the Jews, he's already got his Jewish queen next to Ahasuerus. It's wonderful. It's wonderful to think about this. But here's Mordecai. Now, what is Mordecai like? Well, Mordecai is a brave, courageous man, isn't he? He sees the most powerful man in the kingdom, apart from the king, and he stands up to him. He stands up to him. Maybe other Jews bow down to him, but he stands up to him. You're reminded of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, aren't you? We will not bow down. Know this, O King Nebuchadnezzar. We will not bow down to this image. Mordecai, knowing most probably what Haman is like, his lineage, I will not pay this man homage. Maybe it's more than just respect. Maybe there is, pseudo worship. But whatever it is, he will not bow down. He will not bow down. Mordecai is a man of integrity. He's brave. He's courageous. Now, let's remember that Mordecai didn't know this was coming. He didn't know this was coming. But as soon as it happened, his instinctive response is, I am not going to bow down. It just came upon him, as it would have done to the three. Okay, they would have seen the great statue of Nebuchadnezzar's being built, but they didn't know that was going to happen. But as soon as they did, they had resolved, no, O king, we will not bow down. No, Haman, I am not bowing down to you. I'm not paying you homage. In other words, I know who you are. You're a man, and you're an enemy of my people. And then he's under continuous pressure, so that they spoke to him daily in verse 4, and he would not listen to these people. Often, we give in to pressure, don't we? We might instinctively make our stand to begin with, but then, there's nothing like daily pressure to grind us down, isn't it? But Mordecai, he's a real example to us to keep standing, keep strong. I'm reminded of that courageous woman. Now, you must have seen this on the news, that in Russia, there's this journalist, this presenter, who comes with a placard behind the other Russian woman who's giving the news out, and she comes and stands behind this woman with that placard, no war, and all the rest of it, standing up and actually saying things that could get her killed. I mean, what a courageous woman. She's got children. She could be just put away forever. Now, for now, she's been released and all the rest of it, and fine. But a courageous woman, don't you think? But that's what Haman was like. He's not going to take it. He stands up. But maybe Mordecai didn't know this would happen. But the action of one man brought his entire people into jeopardy. One man's action brought the entire people into jeopardy. Now, what do you think about that? What do you think about that? If you were a Jew in the land, you could have said, Mordecai, what have you done? When this edict goes out, why is Ahasuerus wanting to annihilate us all? Why has this edict gone out? You could say, why? What is all this? Well, let me tell you how it started. Mordecai, one of our lot, didn't bow down to this man Haman. That's how he's to blame. You could think that, couldn't you? One man's action put his entire people into jeopardy. What do you think about that? Well, it happens continuously. When Mary, Queen of Scots, have I got the right? Bloody Mary, anyway. Right. I mustn't confuse the Marys. Right. When Bloody Mary, she got people like John Hooper and others burned at the stake. Who were they? They were the clergy. Why the clergy? They're the leading men of the church, the Protestant church. They're the ones. And you could have thought that there are other Christians at that time could have said, what are you clergymen doing? You're putting us into trouble for your stand. Can't you just pipe it down a bit? We are going to suffer as well as you. Can't you just calm down a little bit? Can't you see what you're doing? We have families and children and so on. You might want to burn the stake, but we don't. Today, there are pastors, preachers, evangelists, church leaders who will get the church into trouble, if I can put it that way. Will you stand with them? They must stand for Christ. They must proclaim the gospel. They must speak of the exclusivity of the Lord Jesus as the only way. Whatever laws are passed, and you know one of those that is being debated now about conversion therapy ban. When it becomes illegal to talk about the biblical view of sexuality and the biblical teaching on gender and so on and so forth, when those that have to stand and proclaim the truth do it, and they are arrested maybe, or fined, it's not on them on their own, is it? The whole church will feel it. Let me give you an example of this. You know that at Wycliffe, we have called James Leviton to come as our co-pastor. Now, James is, for the time being, an assistant in Trinity Church, Oxford. They meet in a cinema. Some of the men and church leaders in Oxford have signed a petition to the government to ask them to consider what it is that they're doing in trying to push forward this conversion therapy ban. And what has happened is that activists have got the names of these church leaders and have started targeting them. Some of them, the leaders of churches in Oxford. The gay pride movement is very active in Oxford, less so than in Sheffield for now. One thing has followed another, and the church that meets in that cinema has now been asked by the cinema to find an alternative place of worship. They're not like Wycliffe that meet at King Edward's in the morning and then have services at Wickbert Road. No, that is their only meeting place for worship. They've been asked to find alternative accommodation for their services. And the reason they've given is because of some desire, I think, increased bookings for cinema in the morning. I mean, whatever. But that's what's happening. That's just, the cusp of it. You could say, well, you could have piped down. You didn't have to sign this petition. We could have kept meeting here without any trouble. But do you see how the action of one man or woman standing up for Christ could bring more of us, unwittingly, unknowingly, into trouble as well. Will you stand with those people? And know that, expect this, prepare for it. It's nothing new. And then we have Esther. Now we've spoken about Esther. Esther, we're told by Mordecai later on that you have been, it could well be that you have been brought into the king's palace for such a time as this. That's a famous sentence from this book, for such a time as this. Because she's hesitant to go to the king, because that's what Mordecai asks her to do in the next chapter. And to begin with, she's hesitant. But she agrees to do it after fasting and prayer. I'm going to come back to this later on. But as I've said before, Esther has unparalleled access to the king. Even more than Haman. Although she must wait and expect the king to be favorable towards her, because you couldn't go into the king's presence without being asked to. It meant the chop. But she takes the risk to do that after fasting and prayer. But she has the king's ear. She is his wife after all. We'll come back to that. So, as I explained earlier on, the wider context is that this has been going on for centuries, right from Genesis chapter 3. It's the great saga of the great epic battle. When you turn from the book of Esther to the book of Job, what do you find? What do you find? You find there God proclaiming the character of Job, and Satan is right in there to bring Job down. There we're told about the epic battle, right there in the first few chapters. But then, God and Satan seem to be silent for the rest of the book, or until right at the end when God speaks again. And Job's left to just express it all out with his friends. But let's bring it right up to date. You see, what happens here has been happening. Let's just think. When you look, when you read here the word annihilation, when you read of Haman the Agagite and what he wanted to do, are you not reminded straight away of Hitler? What did Hitler want to do? The solution, annihilation of the Jews. And I gather that even to his last day, when he was bunkered down, while the Russians were just approaching the city and were actually on the perimeters of it, nothing changes, you might think. But there they were, and the whole of the Reich was just collapsing, and the war was basically lost. But there is Hitler bunkered down, and he's writing his last will, and he's still foaming away at the Jews. There's people who are such and so on and so on. I tried to get rid of them, I failed, but this is my will and testament. Right up till that time, he has this hatred against God's people, God's ancient people. And then you may know of the story of this man Schindler, who saved many Jews, risked his life to do that. And so often God puts people in that situation to bring protection to his people. But you see, it's not. Sometimes we're delivered. Sometimes we burn at the stake. Psalm 72. I was reading this morning. We're told here in verse 12, "For he will deliver the needy when he cries, the poor also, and him who has no helper." You could think of the Jews of that time praying. He will spare the poor and the needy. He will save the souls of the needy. He will redeem their life from oppression and violence. And that's what we see happened in Esther. But then we also read this, "And precious shall be their blood in his sight." Christians often have to pay for their faith with their lives. But you see, when you're killed for your faith, you've actually escaped. You've escaped anything that Satan can do to you. There's no more that he can do to you. Because you see, what it is that Satan wants to do, whether by persecution, by pressure, by, tempting us to whatever sins and worldliness, whatever it might be that Satan's trying to do to us, either through temptation or through persecution. And especially if you think about Job, he wants to, if you like, reveal Job for who he is. He wants to reveal Job for who he is. This man will lose his integrity. He only loves you, God, because of what you give him. Take it all away, and then you see what happens. And on the second occasion, the second attack that happens to Job, what does his wife say to him? His wife says to him exactly what Satan wants him to do. Curse God and die. And that's what Satan wants every one of us to do. And if we can't do it one way, he'll try another way. Intense persecution. You're going to be burned. Forsake this God that you believe in. Give up this silly gospel. Who is Christ? He's nowhere to be seen. He can't save you. You're going to die. Curse him. Leave him, forsake him, because he's forsaken you. And that's what Satan always wants to do, to make us lose our faith, our hold on Jesus Christ. And to say it is all lost. But what did Job say? Job says in this wonderful verse, you find in the book of Job, though he slay me, though God slay me, yet will I trust in him. Can I say to you that that is the sentence that God was waiting to hear? Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. John Hooper, burning, though he slay me, yet I will trust in him. That's what Christ is looking for. And that's what we will be rewarded for. But be encouraged, my friends. Be encouraged that although you may say, how will I cope if I come under such pressure? Well, he will hold me fast. Underneath are the everlasting arms. We will be given grace that we never knew or have experienced. We will be given help that we've never known before. And God will never test us beyond what we can bear. So never fear or say, how will I cope under such circumstances? Oh, he has his power to save you, to hold you, to lift you up, and never take you beyond what you can bear. Only sometimes we just may not know what it is that we can bear until the time comes. But be encouraged that here in the book of Esther, that Satan's ploys often fall in his own head. We hear Haman built these gallows for Mordecai, and by a turn of events, it's Haman himself who hangs on them. So often we read that it comes true, as we read in the book of Proverbs, that he who digs a pit falls into it. And that so often happens to Satan's designs against his people. So often happens to Satan in his designs against God's people. Now, this is what I'm going to close with. Back to Esther. Back to Esther. Little did Haman know that Mordecai had a secret ally. A secret ally who had the king's ear. My friends, we have an ally who has the Father's ear, don't we? Hidden to the world, but he has our ear. We may approach him like Mordecai did Esther. He stands before the Father and he says, this is my people for whom I have died. Satan accuses them, but see, I have died for them. I plead my wounds for them. He intercedes for us daily. We have an ally who has the ear of the Almighty God. Ahasuerus, powerful as he might have been, was a fickle man at the end of the day. We have one who has the ear of our Father in heaven, and he knows how to deliver us. He pleads for us, as Esther pleaded for her people. He pleads for us. He pleads his blood. He looks out for us. And we can take courage that we have one in heaven who will hear us and not forsake us, because he's promised to be with us. Whether we die at the stake or we die in our beds, he says, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. So may we be mightily encouraged by all the things that we learn, so much more from the book of Esther. But we'll leave it there for now, and we'll close with our hymn, Great Providence of Heaven. Great Providence of Heaven.